So today we are going to talk on classroom discourse. What happens in the classroom and how can we improve this classroom discourse. So this is going to be the topic of our conversation today. More a talk by me, so it's more a monologue, but it's all about classroom discourse. So what are we going to do today? We are going to explain classroom interaction. We are going to critique the initiation, response, feedback, exchange structure. We are going to discuss how we can promote meaningful interaction in our classroom. We are going to actually enumerate a few techniques for promoting, negotiating interaction. That is the best kind of interaction in the classroom. And we are going to develop a kind of classroom interactional competence. So what happens in an actual classroom? Who gets to speak? What do they talk about? What does each participant do with the various opportunities to speak? That's a task. What sort of atmosphere is created in the classroom? So is the teacher in a bad mood, is angry? Are the students tired? And what accent or dialect or language is used? Because that also plays a huge role. So we have a model, which is Van Leer's model, of 4 types of classroom discourse in an L2 classroom, which is second language classroom. The first, which he calls, is less topic orientation, less activity orientation. So it's like a typical conversation. It's the least structured, allows the most freedom for self-expression. Normally cannot happen in all classes, should happen from time to time. Then second is more topic oriented, less activity oriented. And this is actually what happens during a lecture or an instruction, where there is very little space for interaction. Here it is all about the teacher. There is little exchange of ideas or opinion. The third category is more topic oriented and more activity oriented. And this occurs with the information to be exchanged follows specific and predetermined lines, as in an interview. And then we have the final category. For example, less topic orientation and more activity orientation, which is pair work, group work, also happens in the classroom. So what happens in most classrooms? In most classrooms, you follow the IRF sequence, which is basically IR, where it is the teacher who initiates and the student who responds. And the EF, which is an optional evaluation or feedback by the teacher. In a later version, it was the F, which was follow-up. So this is what happens in most classrooms. So what are the typical characteristics of a class? The teacher totally controls the topic of discussion. She controls who is going to participate and when that child is going to participate. The role relations between the teachers and the learners are unequal. And the teachers are responsible for managing the interaction which occurs. Teachers, of course, talk more. And why is IRF so popular? Because this is what is expected. This is how all classrooms have been characterized. It's a question-answer routine. And the teacher also wants to make the learners feel good. So she gives feedback from time to time, and the student is made to feel important and necessary. And however, this is a very asymmetrical relationship. This is a relationship where the power in the class is primarily with the teacher. It's not an equal relationship. It's not what we want a teacher to be, a learner among learners, and not some alien. Finally, time constraints are there, so teachers have to use the question and answers because that will help finish the syllabus as quickly as possible. So this is an example where the teacher is talking to Rita and she's telling her, could you explain something about law and order in our country? What happens if you commit a crime? And so the learner goes on and the teacher encourages yes. And then the teacher encourages more, yes. And what's the word, Rita? And then again, and they go home. Very good indeed. So this is a normal IRF model. What is the negative effect of the IRF structure? It gives minimum interactional space to the learners. The teachers talk and talk and talk, and the learners don't get enough opportunities for language use. And in order to facilitate learning, we need to have learners speaking much, much more. And they should be actually the central figure in the classroom interaction. Another very important negative effect is that the interaction becomes mechanical and monotonous. So let's talk of normally, what are the features of classroom discourse? We have elicitation techniques, teacher asks questions, and the students answer, and the teacher is in control of the discourse. And then you have display questions where the teacher knows the answer, and the learner also knows that the teacher knows the answer, but you have to satisfy the teacher. Then you have referential questions, where genuine answers, real answers are required. Then you have closed questions, which is either right or wrong. You have open-ended questions, which allow for more than one opinion, more than one correct answers, and that's a good way. And of course, when you want to fact check, you have these factual questions where the teacher determines if the students know the facts. And then we have another set of questions which are proposed by Bloom. Knowledge questions like, where is the Gir forest? Comprehension questions that ask for understanding. So what does the author mean by surrender value? Application questions, which involve using one's understanding. How does yoga help build concentration? Analysis questions. In what ways is a solar heater better or worse than an electric heater? Synthesis questions. What can we do to make roads safe for visually challenged people? This requires some thinking. And then, of course, evaluation questions. Are large dams the best answers to water and power shortages? So analysis questions, synthesis questions, evaluation questions, these are good questions that should be asked from time to time. Another very important concept, that is wait time. Do we give enough time for the students to answer, to think? We don't. We give insufficient time, and research has shown them that we don't give students time to think about their answer. And so you never get well articulated thought or adequate thought, and you get lesser participation and lesser quality of classroom discourse. So what would increase in wait time help in? It would help in increasing the average length of student response, and all this is well researched. You would get a number of speculative responses, and that's what you want. You'd get student-initiated questions. You'd get student-student interaction, very important. You'd get statements and responses that are based on inference. There'd be more interactional space. There will be more thinking or rehearsal time. Very, very important. Then this is another thing that teachers do, and this is not such a great thing, which is that this is known as teacher echo, that the teacher repeats themselves or they repeat the learner's contribution. It has its uses. It amplifies a learner's contribution for the rest of the class. It confirms correctness. It acknowledges the relevance of an utterance. So overused teacher echo can disrupt the flow of the discourse and reduce learners' interactional spaces. But if you reduce echo, It facilitates learning opportunities. It gives a sort of positive energy to the class. So there's a free flow of discourse, just as in extended wait time. And it allows for a lot of more interaction between the teacher and the students and between the learners themselves. So please, teachers, reduce this echo. Then repair, that's another strategy. This refers to error corrections. And this could be direct or indirect. Direct is when the teacher overtly corrects. For instance, a student may say, my brother likes bikes. And the teacher says, not likes. He likes bikes. Or indirect, for example, my brother likes bikes. Your brother likes bikes, student says. You're talking about your brother, he. Then the student has understood, likes bikes. So you are pushing the student to come up with the correct answer. Then there you have formed focus feedback. So it would be, I am belonging from Delhi. This is very language centered. I am belonging from Delhi, student will say. And teacher would give the correct answer, I am from Delhi. Not the Delhi, not am belonging. Concentrated totally on the language part of it. Then there is content-based feedback. So the student says, during summers I go my grandmother's house. I like spending time there. What do you do there, teacher says? I like to play football and listen stories of grandmother. And the teacher accepts it. Okay, that's interesting. Grandmother's stories are always interesting. Does your grandmother make up those stories or does she read them from a book? So she's interacting, she's getting more language out of the students. Another thing that teachers should do is modify speech for learners. Because remember, 2/3 of classroom discourse is all about learners. So the first thing is we need to modify our speech. Because if the learners do not get the input that they can understand, they are not likely to progress. And there is then a strong influence of teacher language on learner language. So they are the models actually, sometimes the only models for the students. And so they have to be very careful when they modify their speech for the learners. And then the third reason for speech modification is that learners often face difficulties in understanding their teacher's speech. So you have to simplify. So what do you modify? You modify your vocabulary, you simplify your grammar, you make your pronunciation slower, and you use gestures and facial expressions. Tardif has identified 5 modification strategies: self-repetition, linguistic modeling, which we've already talked of, providing information, maybe redundancy, providing more and more information on that subject, expanding on an utterance, and then using elicitation techniques. Then, of course, there are other modification techniques like confirmation checks, like, so you mean, or comprehension checks, did you understand? Or repetition, where the teacher repeats herself or makes the student repeat the utterance. And reformulation, that is rephrasing a learner's utterance. Completion, finishing a learner's contribution. Backtracking, returning to an earlier part of the dialogue or the interaction. So there are some examples. The teacher says, for instance, tell me again, what do you mean by that? Which is a clarification request. The learner then goes on. The first is the introduction. The second is this. And you introduce yourself in a few words about yourself and where you live and what. And the teacher says, so yes. And then it's a problem. And the teacher says yes. And then again the learner goes on. And then she backtracks and says, so can I ask you, why did you write it in your head as you have said it a while back? And the learner says, I don't know, it's like a rule. So the teacher says, right, so it's like a rule. So what do you mean? So, constantly pushing the learner. Then scaffolding, very, very important device, because this is giving the learners cognitive support. It is giving the learner vocabulary. It is helping the learner. And this is done by reformulation, where the learner's contribution is reworked using language which is more appropriate. Modeling, which is by appropriate pronunciation, stress or intonation. And then there is extension, where an utterance is extended, made more comprehensive or more comprehensible to other students. And of course, we come to negotiated interaction, which is talk management. And so this helps, and talk management, we would say, it refers to the ways in which the participants, that is the teachers and the learners, conduct their classroom conversation so that they achieve the immediate learning goal. And the structure of the information exchange determines the way in which the talk is managed. And the teacher breaks away from the IRF pattern and is engaged jointly in meaningful classroom talk. And it encourages the learners to struggle to express themselves, which is very important. So, in classrooms where negotiated interaction is missing, the teachers end up answering their own questions, or they stop with the first correct response. They don't go to the next student. They don't give opportunities for other learners to stretch their linguistic repertoire and take part in classroom discourse. So it's better to ask referential questions, allow for more open-ended answers, have meaningful discussions in the classroom. And this can take place only when we focus on meaning and instead of always evaluating linguistically and then moving on. Look at chances for meaningful discourse. And then, of course, topic management. And this is defined, topicalization is defined as a process by which teachers take up something the teacher or another learner says and makes it to the next topic. Makes it into the next topic. And there are several advantages of letting learners have control over the topic. Very important to let learners have control over the topic. One, the linguistic complexity of the input can be tailored to the learner's own level. It creates better opportunities for negotiating meaning, especially when a communicative problem occurs. It makes the production much more complex and extensive on the part of the learner. So, this is what we want actually, a classroom interactional competence, where teachers and learners interact, and this is used as a tool for mediating and assisting learning. It puts the teaching learning at the center, and this argues that when you improve classroom interactional competence, both the teachers and the learners will immediately improve learning and opportunities for learning. And when we interact in the classroom, we focused primarily on the learner's ability to produce correct utterances, rather than negotiating meanings or clarifying a point or idea. So what we need to do is not just concentrate on the learner, but have meaningful negotiation of meanings or clarification of points or views of ideas. So it is a shift in focus on actually on the individual as well as the collective competence. And proponents of this idea argue that being accurate and fluent is not sufficient. Learners must pay attention to the context of the interaction. They must listen. They must show that they have understood. They must clarify meaning. They must repair their breakdown and all that I talked of earlier. So they have to do all these things. The focus on interactional competence allows the teachers to concentrate on the ability of the learners to communicate the intended meaning and to establish joint understanding in the classroom. So rather than fluency, we see that classroom interactional competence is concerned with confluence, which is the act of making spoken language fluent together with another speaker. So it's not about this one learner's fluency. It is a conversation. So what is confluence? Confluence highlights the ways in which speakers attend to each other's contribution and focus on collective meaning making. This is actually the heart of classroom communication, where the participants, that is the learners and the teachers, are engaged in a constant process of trying to make sense of each other, of negotiating meaning, of assisting, of asking questions, of supporting, clarifying. Thus, both inside and outside the classroom, this is important. It is important to be confluent rather than just fluent. So how do we develop CIC? Essentially, this entails an understanding of the need to use the language appropriately for the teaching goals, and it is adjusted in relation to the co-construction of meaning and unfolding of a lesson. Secondly, it facilitates interactional space. Learners are given adequate space to participate in the discourse, to contribute to the class conversation, to receive feedback of their contribution and to give feedback themselves. Thirdly, the teacher is able to scaffold, paraphrase, repeat, and so on. And so, through shaping discourse, a teacher is helping learners to say what they mean by using the most appropriate language to do so. Finally, CIC makes use of effective eliciting strategies. This is the ability of the teacher to ask questions, to refine, to define, to adjust these questions, to clarify to the learners what is central, and that is the defining notion of CIC. And so what we've discussed today is the importance of promoting meaningful interaction in the classroom, and this lies with the teacher because the teacher contributes 2/3 of classroom speech. It is important to optimize our discourse, not maximize. Understand, not maximize, but optimize our discourse. To restrict IRF structure, promote negotiated interaction in the classroom in order to provide a rich learning environment. Not accept the first learner response, but push learners to express more clearly. Don't look for correct answers, but facilitate interaction. And then as teachers, we need to be active listeners, constantly reaffirming, questioning, clarifying whatever that the learner is contributing, so that we can co-construct meaning effectively in the classroom and thereby maximizing learning opportunities. Thank you very much.